All right, welcome back to our Revelation study. We've got here all the way across the pond, Pastor Joel Rosenauer. Hey, Joel, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hello,
Good.
everybody.
Good to see you. Zach, hanging out in his vehicular today.
That's
Gonna
what
be
the cool
going.
kids do.
That's what the cool
Because
kids do.
because
Yes.
he's getting old and lost a part to his.
And
Oh,
Dr. Don Preston, good to see you.
Great to be here. Great to
And
be
Mike
here.
sporting his Burroughs of Berea mug. I love it.
what?
That's
What are you talking
That's what
about?
I'm talking about. Today my mug is have yourself a merry little Christmas. My wife got me that.
Hey,
There you go.
Well, after that talk last week, gentlemen, we got through maybe three verses. And so
Outstanding.
if you guys want to hear me read it, just go back and watch that because I'm not going to read it today. I think everybody knows where we are in Revelation 20. So Mike, anything, you ready to kick it off? Let's get this going.
Man, yes.
Okay.
Because I've struggled actually with this passage for a while. Because as we've talked about, you have the definite article, the war,
Mhm.
the Armageddon, chapter 16. We looked at Gog and Magog in chapter 19, and of course we see how it harmonizes with Luke 21 and the army surrounding Jerusalem, and we know it's the same event. But really, this is a different aspect of the same war. We're looking at something from a different angle, I think. And before it's the city that's judged by the Romans. And I really, really wanted to see this harmonize. I wanted the they and the them to be the city, but the more I looked at it grammatically, it's not. It's the armies that are going to be destroyed. So let's go ahead and read it. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So the first question is, who are the they that marched and that are devoured by fire? At first, I was like, well, I know that the they that marched are the armies, but I wanted the city to be burned because that fits with Luke 22, right? God sent his armies to burn what? The city. But really, we're looking at the armies that Satan deceives. They're the ones that are burned. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not sure it's a distinctly either or.
Okay.
And here's the reason why. Because you have the gathering of the armies, and they surround the city of the saints, and fire comes out from the Lord to destroy them. And I agree with you on the they and et cetera, et cetera. By the way, just a real quick sidebar here. I don't put a tremendous amount of weight on it, so I want there to be a little bit of a caveat by what I'm about to say. But when it talks about their number being as the sand of the sea, etc., okay, in the Old Testament, while there are a few examples in which that's simply descriptive language of any large army,
True.
that language is
That's right.
used of Israel.
Mhm.
And again, I'm not. There's not a hard fast rule here, but
Right.
it is at least it's going. Huh? Okay, maybe I have to conflate that with the rest of this. So anyway, I conflate 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 with Revelation chapter 28 and following, and that is the fire coming down and destroying the armies, destroying the persecutor, because that's who these armies are in this context. They are persecutors of the saints. They're surrounding the holy city. Okay. And so while certainly Nero's armies surrounded the city of Rome and burnt her with fire, at the same time, the persecutors of the saints, which appears to me to be the focus of Revelation 28 and following, conflates so beautifully with 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, where Paul speaks about how at the coming of Christ, he was going to come in flaming fire, taking vengeance on those that do not know God. And that, of course, is in turn taken directly from Isaiah 66, and the coming of the Lord in flaming fire with his chariots of fire to destroy those who were persecuting the saints. So I see a direct chain of linkage between Isaiah 66, 2 Thessalonians 1, and Revelation 20. By the way, Doug Wilson does as well, only he takes Revelation 20 as the end of human history.
Yeah. So it says they were surrounded, okay, so these armies that come up, they're coming up against the camp of God's people and the city he loves. I believe these are two distinct things. So I believe that the Roman army surrounded Jerusalem there for a period. Also, the Zealots or the Idumeans, they also surrounded the city and were let in the same year, AD 66. The Christians are seeing this, AD 66. And they're seeing all the abominations that are taking place in the temple between AD 66 and 67. So they're seeing all this and they're fleeing. So they're surrounded. They're seeing all these abominations. Who are the camp of God's people? And I've got here, I go to Luke 21:22. When you, the Christians in Jerusalem, you flee. So we have a city within a city. We have the city of the living God, the new covenant city within the old covenant city that is about to be destroyed. And this camp of God's people, the Greek or the Hebrew for camp here in the Old Testament, I guess it would be Hebrew, is the wilderness or the holy war language, portraying the church as a pilgrim people in transition. So they're going to be transitioning out of that old covenant system by fleeing it. And I think that the city he loves is the holy city of Revelation 11. It's still Old Covenant Jerusalem that's going to be tread down for 3.5 years. And it's the holy people, still described as holy in God's love because of that covenant relationship before AD 70, that we're going to be shattered for that 3.5 years. But that's my take. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say.
That's interesting.
Well, I cheated a little bit. Maybe I grokked this, Don. Maybe.
Doesn't count. Doesn't count.
Maybe I grokked it and I said grammatically, okay, what's being burned? Well, grammatically, absolutely, 100%. It's the armies that are surrounded. I'm like, well, darn, that screwed up my interpretation. But I had to go with the grammar. And once I saw the grammar, I kind of saw this a little differently. But I think it works. I think it's just a different angle of the war. And we see that in chapter 19, because Christ is riding. He's going to war with these people. And I think it kind of carries over here into chapter 20.
When you mention AD 66, because you're talking about whenever the Christians flee, right? So you're saying AD 66. Okay, so that's not even Titus at that point. That's Cestius Gallus at that point.
The initial surrounding, and then they retreat.
Yeah.
So I don't have a hard time with you saying it like this, because of course there were fires that were set from within that were done by the Zealots historically that burned up all their food, which is what made the siege so bad anyway on them. But also the fighting whenever Cestius Gallus, almost, according to Josephus, he almost took the city. Gallus did, and then something made him turn around and leave. That something, I believe, was what Jesus was telling them, God's providence. That is whenever they flee. And then later when Titus returns, that's when the total siege takes place. So I think what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 24 is that timing, around just Gallus's timing. And then later it's too late. And I think that
exactly.
And it kind of works like on the timing, like the beast and the false prophet. That's why John mentions that they were already cast into the fire. But then later, this is whenever Satan is going to be thrown into like the overall fire. So, I mean, I never thought of it like that, but I can see it. I can see that. Of course, I'm using history, guys, not the Bible. Right, Zach?
I did find an interesting quote just this morning from Josephus. And he was talking about the time period when the Zealots appointed this idiot, as Josephus calls him,
Yeah.
Fannius, to be the high priest,
Yes.
which
Man
was
of
in six.
lawlessness. Oh,
I don't know. No. But anyway, don't get me sidetracked. But it was during that period of time, which is AD 67. So it's after the time of Cestius Gallus. Things have continued to get worse. And so the Zealots, in this political move to appoint this Fannius guy, who was just a, country bumpkin, according to Josephus, and the author of this book, and it's called The Beginning of Eschatology. It's by a woman whose name is that long, Russian, I think. But she postulates, and she quotes Josephus, that from the time of the appointment of Fannius, things began to deteriorate. And quoting Josephus saying, it made the escape from Jerusalem more difficult. And I found that very, very interesting. So this is in 67. But it was the Zealots who began killing the inhabitants of Jerusalem trying to escape, because they were trying to consolidate their power, and they would literally kill anyone trying to escape. But it is a citation from Josephus from 67 AD, dated 67 AD, of people continuing to try to escape the city. And what this author, I can't even begin to pronounce her name at this point, what they point out is that it was the Zealots committing all of these atrocities in the temple, thus tying it to the abomination.
Yeah, so these are the abominations that took place. In AD 66, the Roman army surrounded Jerusalem. Eusebius says this is probably when the Christians fled. Rick covered that. AD 66, the Zealot army surrounds Jerusalem. AD 66, the temple is plundered by Florus, leading to riots.
Yep.
AD 66, again, Jews stop lawful offerings and prayers for the emperor. Josephus says this is the foundation of the war, quote unquote.
Yep.
And then in AD 66 and 67, the Zealots defile temple area by killing 8,500 and the high priest, and then installing their own unlawful high priest, however you say his name. I always forget.
Fannius, I think.
Fannius, okay. They then set up residence in the temple and held mock trials. So you see the series of abominations that will cause the desolation, the Romans to come.
Yeah.
I think that what you mentioned about Florus is very key as well. I was talking about that in our last session. Like we said, Dr. Preston, follow the money. That is definitely what was going on. That was the purpose. That's why Rome was really, clamping down on them. And a lot of the reasons why the people who were escaping the city, that they were killing them, is because they were swallowing the gold. If you can read about that too, they were actually disemboweling them, taking the gold from them. Sorry if that was gross, but they were trying to escape. And some of the zealots, like you said, or I always say zealots, but they're trying to set up their own, version of the holy city, themselves. And so everything that they do, they just keep increasing their abominations against God. And Fannius is not obviously supposed to be there. And so that's like the worst of the worst, right? So eventually he's going to get taken out.
Yeah. It's difficult for us to appreciate seeing, we're 2,000 years removed from it. And really the primary sources we have is Josephus. So it's difficult for us to put all these pieces together in a coherent, cohesive narrative to understand. But I think Josephus does in the narrative you just read there, Mike, from Rick. To me, that's an increasingly convincing timeline. And it explains the abomination of desolation just pretty well. What I found particularly relevant, though, was that I have traditionally placed the abomination in 66 and the time of Cestius Gallus, when he withdrew and lost almost 5,500 troops in the withdrawal, and it was catastrophic.
And didn't even need to. Didn't even
He
need
didn't
to.
have to. Josephus is just like, what was he doing?
Yeah, like it just
You're
boggles
right.
the mind.
And,
Yeah.
and the zealots within the city goes, oh, this is God.
Yeah.
Mhm.
God is giving us the victory. Let's go out and follow them. So they did. And they
Mhm.
just slaughtered them like crazy in what pass was that? I've forgotten the name of the pass, Mountain Pass, where they just trapped them and killed them by the thousands. And like I said, the Jews saw that as a sign from God, whereas the moderates had been gaining more and more strength.
Right.
But all of a sudden, and in fact, was it Eusebius? Who was it that said there was actually an embassage of the Jews, leaders of the Jews from within the city? I guess it was Josephus,
Mhm.
who were getting ready to go out to try to sue for peace when all of a sudden they realized the soldiers are leaving.
Mhm.
And they didn't know why. And then the zealots began to kill them for wanting to go out and make peace. And so you just got a perfect storm of stuff happening that just led almost invariably to that destruction and desolation. But
It's cool. It's because it's like God took a hook, to use scriptural language. He took a hook into the Romans to drive them out, and then he took a hook of pride in the false prophets and emboldened them even harder to deceive themselves to stay in the city to be destroyed by God's wrath.
oh yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, it
those
really
are
is quite remarkable when you're reading Josephus and you see that. I mean, if it really, when you earlier, Mike, when you said God's providence, that was what when I was reading, I was like, this is like the craziest story I've ever read. Like, when does a general who's got the victory stop and say, I don't have the victory, let's flee? Like, why? Like, how did that happen? It's God fulfilling what Jesus had said would come. That's all I could come up with when I was reading the history of it.
And that's
Yeah.
the perfect time for the Christians to leave, because now you have the zealots and everyone in the city so enraged and so confident that Messiah or God is going to deliver them. So you could anticipate how much wrath and anger they would pour out on the Christians in the city.
Mhm.
So the Christians leave at just the right time. The Romans leave, and he hardens, Jerusalem's heart. It's amazing.
truly is an amazing story. Really is.
Yeah. It's an awful story, actually. It's the worst Holocaust I've ever read. One of them.
Well,
All right, we're next, gentlemen.
Well, Satan is judged. I guess we could talk about that. So in Revelation, there are 4 main enemies of God and his saints in the book of Revelation, and they are introduced in chapter 12 and onward in the order of Satan, the sea beast, the land beast, the false prophet, and Babylon. As Revelation progresses, their defeat in judgment is pictured in the reverse order. These are different scenes of the same end-time persecution and judgment of God's enemies. And any good all-millennials like Simon Kistemacher, Hendrickson, all these guys will point this out. And they understand that the timing of the judgment scene and the casting of Satan into the lake of fire in 2010 as the presumed place where the great harlot is burned with fire in 1716. And at the same time, the beast and the false prophet are cast into the lake of fire. And they're correct. It's the same judgment. And that's where the partial preterist just drops the ball. They have no problem seeing the false prophet and the beast being thrown in the lake of fire in AD 70. But all of a sudden, Satan, they've got to have Satan, right? So that Satan being cast in the lake of fire has to be at the end of world history.
Mhm.
This brings up the issue here. I think I interrupted somebody.
Yeah, Zach or Joel, were you guys?
Go ahead, Don, because this is a little bit of just a bit of a tiny pivot. So go ahead.
Okay, well, what I was just simply going to say is what you pointed out here, Mike, is the principle of recapitulation in the book of Revelation. That is such an incredibly powerful reality. Dispensationalism says, oh, the book is a continuous chronological narrative. This follows this, this follows this, this follows this. And as a result of that, what they of necessity wind up with they wind up with all these different comings of the Lord in the book of Revelation, all within a period of 7 years, by the way.
Mhm.
And you have at least 3 the wars, and you have at least 3 destructions of physical creation as a result of that consecutive chronological narrative. And, G.K. Beale does as good a job as almost anyone in his massive tome on Revelation of pointing out how recapitulation, yeah, there you go, is such a powerful, powerful hermeneutical principle for understanding the book of Revelation. And yet, I can't tell you the number of people I've corresponded with who just simply do not get it. I've had some people say, "What are you talking about recapitulation? What do you mean by that?"
Scary.
Oh, ooh,
Right.
well, okay. Let me explain. So go ahead, Joel. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So Rick, what did you had a great title for this series when we started off, and it's so great that I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's my point. So remind us what that was.
The covenant lawsuit.
The covenant lawsuit against Jerusalem, is that what you called it?
Well, it was like the covenant. It was a covenant lawsuit, and then it was a covenant judgment. Covenant judge.
Yeah. So what's important about that, and this is kind of to Mike's point where partial preterists get all over the place, and I just as I was just going over some of this a little bit, kind of last evening and looking up a couple things, but for partial preterists, and something many will acknowledge, practically all of Revelation, all of the New Testament, and we've talked about, Wilson and Gentry and people before, so people know some of those texts, but they're still missing, what's in that title there, that this is a covenant lawsuit against Jerusalem. So on the one hand, they're seeing, yes, I can see how a lot of these prophecies are fulfilled in and around 70 AD. But if coupled with that is who the judgment was specifically against and what specifically the judgment was for, getting into the martyrs and all the prophets being killed and so on, like we've talked about with Babylon, then that seems like that keeps you then from throwing it somewhere out in the future. But if you look at and you miss the specifics of the covenant and who the judgment was against, you can it's like there's these blinders on where they can see, oh yeah, I see a lot of these events happen. I can't deny the timing language and so forth, but because they're missing who the judgment was against, there's still this future final judgment against someone else. And I just think that it helps me understand that's a big piece that's being missed. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that as a result of that, and I don't want to talk too much here, but as a result of that, you have people coming up with the idea that Babylon of Revelation is any city in every city.
Yeah.
Right.
That's exactly what you wind up with. You have no
Yeah.
historical application, or you do like G.K. Beale in his commentary on Revelation, saying things like, well, there's no question that Jerusalem was initially in focus here, but it's far beyond that. He doesn't tell you why it's far beyond that, or he doesn't tell you why it's bigger than that. It's just like, well, I can't deny Jerusalem is there, but that can't be it. That can't be it. So I'll just say it's much broader than that.
Right. It somehow become, people say it's almost like a microcosm that, yes, we can see that, but there's macro out in the future. Well, why is that? Well, there just, there just must be. And a lot of the guys too, that'll see we just mentioned that, that's there's other things that can be seen as happening at that time, but Satan being judged as later. Well, again, if you're being consistent with the timing language, and there's other places too, but you go to Romans 16:20, where soon Satan will be crushed under your feet. It's like, okay, so I take all these other statements, except that one, or except this one. And anyway, I just think it's good for people to see that and the inconsistencies that are there, which we know and a lot of people have seen already, but it's good to point them out.
Well, Zach, since we're talking about recapitulation, Revelation, it's the same coming, it's the same judgment throughout. Wouldn't Matthew 24 and 25 kind of be recapitulation as well?
Yeah, I think so too. This is why I have a hard time with people splitting the Olivet Discourse, because every bit of this is, you're going to wind up at the same. In Matthew 25, he's coming to the same people that he left from. And if you cross-reference Luke's Olivet Discourse, I think it's in Luke 17 with Matthew's Olivet Discourse, a lot of people will go to Matthew 24:36 and say of that day that he uses the far demonstrative. And if you go back to Luke 17, he uses the far demonstrative to refer to this generation in Luke 17. So people like Ken Gentry do that. no matter how much of Revelation, whether amillennial or postmillennial, no matter how much of it you give to 8070, when you split some of it, you're still not allowed to do it because the Olivet Discourse is going to hold you accountable to it.
Well, they take, most of them take, a minority of them will take the parousia, verse 27. Matthew 24:27 is 8070. Harder to find partial preterists to admit that. You'll find a lot of them admitting verse 30 is 8070. But that is that you parallel that to Matthew 25:31, and it's the same coming in glory and power and so forth. And it is that coming in Matthew 25:31 that brings the judgment of Satan and the nations. So if it's recapitulation, which a good amillennialist is going to say that, just like a good amillennialist is going to say Revelation is recapitulation, they're going to say the same thing. They're going to say the parousia in Matthew 24:27 and the erchomai of verse 30 is the same coming of Christ as Matthew 25:31. It's the second coming, and all of this brings the resurrection, the trumpet gathering, and the judgment of Satan. We're right there. We're with them 100%. We agree with you all millennials. Thank you for making our case. But we agree with you partial preterists that take the coming and the parousia in Matthew 24 as 8070. So again, it's what I do. So when you combine those two, you get our view.
Yeah. Something, if it's okay with you guys, I'd like to bring this up just because, and it's going to show everybody my ignorance, and that's okay. But one of the difficulties that I have, especially with this part of Scripture, is when we're describing Satan being judged, that when we look at the rest of symbology throughout Revelation, a lot of times we humanize what those things are. Okay, so we'll see the armies that are the Roman armies, or we'll see the armies that are the zealots. You know, we're taking some of this imagery and we're placing people into it. And I'm curious, this final Satan or Satan that's being defeated, you see that as the spiritual being that's being defeated? Ultimately, that's what's happening here? Or are we equating that word Satan with something that is also human? Because it looks like it's happening as we're growing in the story, it's almost like Satan is being rooted out of every little nook and cranny that's within this city until finally he pulls out and Christ ultimately defeats this supernatural being. Is that how you're taking this being destroyed? A supernatural being thrown into a fire? Anyone?
Well, if you ask me, my AT&T position is yes.
Okay.
Just because I'm looking at how Jude and Peter is looking at Enoch.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at Second Temple Judaism. I'm looking at Matthew 12. You know, when we talked about Satan being bound and demon possession there, and the Jews claiming that Jesus, in Mark's account, that Jesus was possessed by Beelzebub, which is just another way of saying Satan. And Jesus doesn't say, "Hey, wait a second, guys, you're Satan." So I just, it's kind of like the whole covenant creation thing, right?
Uh-huh.
If you take it, you take it, and you have to kind of really lay out the exegesis. And I actually sometimes I lean in the covenant creation direction. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. And I know people are watching this, and I know they're,
well, you're not the only one, so have I.
Honest, I lean in that direction a lot of times, but I can't give a full exegesis of it. And so I hold back, and I'm still studying, and I'm not going to commit. And so when it comes to the Satan thing too, you know, that it opens up a door of other things, of demon possession that I'm reading in the Gospels. You know, well, what is that? And angels and stuff like that. So that's my position. I think Don and Zach might have a different position, and they're more than welcome.
Well, you know, Zach gave up there at Montana, he gave about as good a presentation on Satan as I've heard in a long time. And I think I told him up there that got a lot of questions answered, but at the same time, there are a number of different passages that I simply haven't been able to harmonize with the idea that the Jews were the very epitome of Satan. Now, my traditional position has been, and to go back to Mike stealing my line, AT&T position, but my position has been that Satan was a very real spiritual being, but that he used the Jews,
Right.
he used Peter, he used others as his instrument.
Right.
You know, when Jesus said in Luke to Peter, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Well, number one, he wasn't saying that Peter was himself some kind of a spiritual fallen
Right.
from heaven, spiritual entity, but he was certainly saying, and as he even said to Peter, Satan has desired you
To sift you as
so
wheat.
that he might sift you. Well, okay, then there's a separate entity here. And somebody might say, well, that was the Jews trying to influence Peter. Well, if that's the case, we have no record of it whatsoever. All we have is Jesus' statement that Satan has desired you that he might sift you.
Mhm.
And there are different instances.
Galatians 2.
Galatians 2 is one of them, but that I just simply haven't been able to reconcile. And I went on record. I even said this in my debate with Sam Frost on the Chris Arnzen show, that I am convinced that in the book of Revelation, Satan is Israel. Or to express it, Israel is Satan, because Israel is the persecutor, but Satan is the persecutor. Well, it's not an either or. It's
Mhm.
not an either or. We could say that Satan was using Israel to persecute the church, which would be perfectly acceptable with me. Or we could say Israel is the Satan, the adversary, which all of us know is simply the meaning of Satan, the adversary. So I'm a little bit like this, like Mike was saying on covenant creation. I'm seeing some things in that regard that I don't have the answers for, so that I can go, well, okay, either way.
Right.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to be pushed over into it, and I'm not trying to escape it, and I'm not trying to go that way. I'm right here. I'm saying, okay, show me the evidence.
Sure. There's one. I don't know if you remember my talk in Montana, but I was trying to point out that the proto-evangelium, for me, was the eschatology of Genesis. That
Sure.
it was that when you go to the end of the story, that the seed of the woman is going to crush the head of Satan, of that serpent, right? So ultimately, Jesus was a real born human being. So that seed takes on a physicality to me. That seed of the woman, I see the woman, we can look at it as Israel, we can look at it as Mary, however you want to look at it, but wherever that seed comes out from that, Christ is born into the world. Christ gets physically circumcised on the 8th day. Christ is born under the law, just like it said. I bring this up because John the Baptist and Jesus both called those people in Israel, or in Judah, particularly Judah, the offspring of the serpent. That's really what he's calling them. When you say, you brood of vipers, he's literally saying you are the children of that serpent of old. And when John brings up, and I think is it Revelation 12 or 15, where he talks about the dragon and that old the serpent of old. When he brings that up, to me, if your brain isn't thinking about that serpent that's back during the proto-evangelium, and by the way, it's an oracle against Satan where we hear about it. It wasn't a promise to the woman, it was a promise to that serpent. So that's why I'm asking the question at this point, what are we learning? Are we learning that the brood of vipers had gotten to this point? God is rooting them out, and then eventually the one like that serpent that's back in the garden, the ultimate one is being taken out. That is a supernatural being that has went from Genesis all the way to Revelation. It's found in both places, beginning and end. So is it, that's where I'm at. I'm asking that question. Like because a lot of times we'll say like Israel is Satan. Well, yeah, They are at times. But in particular, we're dealing with Judah when Jesus is here.
Absolutely.
Jesus is up in the north going for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. It's the ones down here in Judah that are mixtures of Idumeans, the Edomites. Yes, I'm going to say it again. And then you've also got those who are, natural born children of Abraham, that even John and Jesus are saying, you can call yourselves that, but you're missing the point, because Christ is the promised seed, the singular seed of Abraham that's here. But he was a physical being. He was a physical person.
Well, Adam was too. I mean, there are different concepts of this in Genesis, from futurists,
right,
preterists. Okay, so wide range.
Yes.
But my position would be that Adam was maybe not the first man, but the first covenant man. And I've been saying that since I read John Selhammer, even before Tim and Jeff kind of, that was my term, covenant man, the first covenant man that was living, that God revealed himself to in this land. And John Selhammer shows how the geographical areas of the rivers, they're the same. The land of Eden is the promised land. He shows that by the geographical. So it's not just a theological connection or a recapitulation, but it's really tying it together. And I guess I'll kind of spill the beans a little bit, but I wrote this article on Isaiah 65 and Isaiah 51, going over the Targums, where the Targums were like, heaven and earth is covenant. It has nothing to do with the physical planet. And I typed in, I did a little AI, and I said, well, give me some Targums on the heaven and earth of Genesis 1. Same thing, covenant. I'm like, well,
now here's a little caveat to that, Mike.
yeah.
I typed in, I think I used Grok. I wanted the Targumic commentary on Isaiah 51, verse 6. Now, I already knew what you're saying right here, and I just got quote after quote after quote after quote from leading rabbinic scholars down through the centuries, through the millennia, that Isaiah 51, 15, and 16, I have put my word in your mouth to establish the heavens and lay the foundation of the earth, and to say to Zion, you are my people. And almost every single one of them says, oh, okay, that's God creating Israel's covenant heaven and earth.
At Sinai, when he delivered
at Sinai, absolutely, at Sinai. But in Isaiah 51, verse 6, they say that's literal physical heaven and earth. So you're going, okay, these Targumic commentators,
they're inconsistent.
They're inconsistent.
Same
verse 5, verse 6, literal creation. Verse 15 and 16. Now, the one thing I've really appreciated in the comments on verse 15 and 16 is how they actually go into the Hebrew and talk about, well, here's a causative phrase, here are the infinitives, and here's the this, and here's the that, much of which is above my head. I understand the force of it. I don't understand the linguistics of it, of the Hebrew for sure. But I mean, good grief. Once again, these are the leading Hebraic scholars through the centuries, and there's virtual unanimity that Isaiah 51, 15, and 16 is the creation of Israel's heaven and earth at Sinai.
That's probably a good segue into the next verse. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it. The earth and the heavens fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. Now, as I've done exhaustive study on this in Reformed theology, I had been looking, there's only two passages that partial preterists were saying is referring to the physical heavens and earth that will be decreated in the future when Christ comes, blah, 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 blah. And there were Hebrews 1, 10 and 12, and this passage right here. That was the only two. And then there were some partial preterists, Joel Webben, Andrew Isker, started kind of seeing Hebrews 1, the rolling up of the heavens and earth there, and the perishing there was the old covenant system, just as Hebrews 12, heavens and earth. And I was like, yes, I needed that. I love it. So now they only have one, guys. This is it. This is their only text that system has. And if you only have one proof text for a doctrine in a book that is filled with recapitulation and time text, you're in trouble.
Yeah. And the last point that you made there, it needs to be emphasized. This fleeing of heaven and earth goes all the way back, even though the exact specific terminology is not used. The idea of it is found in Revelation 6:12-17. It's found in Revelation chapter 16. So at least twice before chapter 20, you have heaven and earth fleeing away, heaven and earth being destroyed.
Yeah. My friend Michael Bennett asked Joel McDermott, he says, why are you taking heaven and earth in Revelation 20:11 as the physical heaven and earth, but in Revelation 21:1 you say heaven and earth there is the old covenant? And he says, well, because of the Greek word for fled. And he went on to this big thing. And so I got on my computer and I'm like, that's kind of weird. So I said, I want to see where this fled is. And I'm like, well, it's right there in Revelation 16.
Yep.
So he didn't even deal with it within Revelation itself, because he knew that was a fleeing of decreation that was connected to Old Covenant Israel and the system. And it was just like so deceptive. But you're right. It's right there.
Yeah.
Something I had done a little research here, especially about the Great White Throne, because I was thinking about that this letter was written to the 7 churches, right? And so I was thinking about the audience. What did they hear? Like, where do you find this Great White Throne anywhere in the Old Testament? And although there's mentions of the throne, this is kind of unique, the way that he's saying it, this Great White Throne. And have any of you in your studies ever recognized that this is something that comes from the Roman world? Have you ever heard this? This is something that the 7 churches would recognize, because it says this: a Roman tribunal took place on a raised platform where the magistrate sat. The judge sits above the accused, and the accused sit below. The records are then kept and opened. The verdicts are final, and the appeals were rare. That you were not allowed to appeal. And Roman justice, of course, was harsh, public, often corrupt, and biased towards wealth and power. But nothing was going to happen with this Great White Throne. But the Christians in Asia Minor would have been recognized, because did you know that they were all being arrested for atheism? Have you read that or heard this?
Yes.
Atheism meaning that they don't worship Roman gods.
Right.
That was what
Right.
atheism was for them. They were accused of sedition because they believed that Jesus was a king. They were accused of social disruption, and sometimes they were executed without trial. So this is something that the 7 churches would have recognized, and with Roman authority. Okay. But Revelation mirrors the imagery, but instead of a tribunal seat, it's the throne. The accused are standing before it. The books are open, judgment's rendered, and there's no appeal. But the judge isn't a Caesar. The judge is Christ. So they're using Roman imagery, things that they would recognize. Yes, of course, it's all throughout the Old Testament. We can find things about the thrones even within Revelation. But I just thought it was very interesting when it said Great White Throne. I was like, why did it use that terminology? And it's strikingly similar to a Roman tribunal and what they would have all underwent. And basically the message is being stated is, no, Christ is king, not the Caesar. He is going to render this judgment.
Yeah, that's great stuff. Isn't it? Was it not the city of Pergamum that had the throne of Satan there?
Yes, it has the throne of Satan in Pergamum. It mentions that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
So was that the supernatural Satan? Yes. It was basically that. It was I think it was Zeus actually is who they were worshiping there.
Yes, there in Pergamum, that would have been it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I like how Beale points out that in Jewish tradition, that the mountains and the islands, whenever they're talking about fleeing or being destroyed, that's equivalent to saying heaven and earth.
Oh, sure.
So again, there's a parallel here. And then he connects this, which I think is crazy. He connects this to Daniel chapter 2, verse 35, because of the phrase, a place was not found for them. But of course, Daniel chapter 2 is when the stone cut without hands comes and judges the nations, which is parallel to Daniel 7, when Christ comes from heaven and he judges the nations. So this is AD 70.
Hmm.
That's during the time of the Roman Empire when that judgment comes. So I think Beale kind of digs himself into a hole here by making that connection. But you can see how this is progressively linked. Every mountain and island is connected then to chapter 16, which again talks about every island. But here he uses the Greek word fled, fuego. And then you can see how that is now carried over into chapter 20, because now heaven and earth flee. So that connects back to chapter 16. But then now you can see how heaven and earth of chapter 20 is now connected to the heaven and earth passing away in Revelation 21. They're just one inseparable chain. These are all the same decreation event. There's just
That is good, Mike. That is. I really like this. This chart.
Yeah, me too.
That's cool.
really easy to see.
Yeah, and not only that, when you tie in Revelation chapter 16 and verse 19, when you have Babylon remembered before God, and that word, and it's one of those Greek words I have difficulty pronouncing, so I won't even try. Something or other. But remembered has a distinctly covenantal meaning to it. So when Babylon was remembered before God, she was being remembered for the sins that she had committed, which was Revelation chapter 16, verse 6. Righteous and holy are you because you have judged her, because she has shed the blood of the prophets. So here you have Yahweh holding this Babylon covenantally responsible. Okay, that raises the question: what city that killed the prophets was ever in a covenant relationship with God, and that because of her sins would be held accountable for those sins and destroyed? Not only destroyed, but Revelation chapter 17, destroyed with fire, the punishment of an unfaithful child of a priest.
Daughter of a priest, yeah.
A daughter of a priest.
When Jesus himself, doesn't he accuse them in Matthew 23? Doesn't he give you that? Doesn't he tell you what they were responsible for and what blood that they'd shed? I mean, that's what he's doing there, making it clear while he's standing at the temple, saying all of this to them.
Stephen standing in the temple, Acts chapter 7, which of the prophets have you not slain?
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier in Matthew, he said, "You'll say to this mountain, move, and it'll be thrown into the sea." Well, I think that's Babylon the harlot and the moving the mountain, the same thing, just like in Revelation.
I heard you preach on that once before, and I've believed it ever since, Zach. That's good.
Revelation 8. That's when that mountain's thrown in.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Well, I came up with that, Rick. On my own. Never heard anybody else say it.
I love it. Well, just so you know, when I was growing up in the Southern Baptist world, when they said you can ask the Lord to move a mountain, but you better bring a shovel, that's what they used to say to me, and I was like, I don't think that's what it means.
That's pretty good.
One thing here, and just before we go to these next verses, and because I was so convinced, like we all were at one time or another, that this was all the end of the world and material, planet, and cosmos and so forth. There's a lot of things I never thought through because I didn't see the need to. And then you come to this other perspective. So just verse 11, what we were talking about, this great throne. And thank you, Rick, by the way, for pointing out this parallels with Rome. But from whose face and earth the heaven have fled away. And we see a lot of this language. So if this was really the end of time, some type of material thing, you've got, in dispensationalism, you've got everything basically being destroyed. In the Reformed world, I call it like a home makeover. But in either case, while this is happening, where are all the people? All this stuff just completely fades away, and people will say, well, God can do any miracle. So does he just take a couple billion people and just hold them up here and throw the earth? I mean, the point is when you really start thinking through these things that I had never really thought through, man, it's hard. It's a hard case. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Mm-hmm.
I like that picture of Christ's face, and his face is like the sun, and his eyes are. So God's face before the old covenant people, they're like weeds. He burns them up. But yet for the garden of God, for his children, he is the sun, photosynthesis. He is the power of our life. He's our righteousness. He brings healing through his rays. So So one creation he burns and destroys by the glory of his face, and the other he gives life and an intimate relationship with. But at the same time, he remembers them no more. So covenantally, he kind of turns his back to them as well. So it's a lot of different metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, that imagery there, and this may seem like a little bit of a sidebar, but I'm writing this appendix for Mike's book.
Yeah, really. I wonder when that's going to be done.
I didn't ask you to interrupt me. So anyway, I told Mike after I started writing on this, I said, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to write this for your book, but I reserve the right to use it in one of my own books because, boy, this is good stuff. Okay. But when you look at
it end up being bigger than my book. I'm just
it
saying.
it may be. Yeah. But here's the deal. And I have said this for many years. You know, I produced a chart years and years ago showing the direct parallels between the book of Hosea and 1 Corinthians 15. I had do something like 22 parallels. And by the way, at one time, Sam Frost called it, pat on my back here, but Sam Frost says one of the finest pieces of exegesis, biblical exegesis, that could be found anywhere. Now he calls it tripe, and he calls it ignorant, and he calls it stupid, you know, so whatever. So somewhere in between there. But here's the point. Hosea is about the divorce of the 10 northern tribes. And the Lord said that Israel would continue in that state for many days until the last days in which they would repent, they would serve David, their king. So here's the divorce of Israel. Then we have in Jeremiah 3, Jeremiah 50, we have the Lord turning and not only rehearsing the divorce of the 10 northern tribes, but anticipating the ultimate divorce of Judah and Benjamin. In Hosea chapter 6 and verse 11, he says that in the last days, at the time of the salvation of the remnant, by the way, think Romans and Paul, but at the time of the salvation of the remnant, Judah would also have her harvest, just like her sister Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then we have this fantastic promise of the remarriage of Israel. And at that time, and I'm going to have to abbreviate this, but at that time, what would happen? The Lord said at that time, this is the redemption of Israel. This is the glorification of Zion. This is the remarriage and the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
That's key. The resurrection. Then shall they see eye to eye. Now, in the Septuagint, it is prosopon, prosopon.
Face to face.
And that face to face, which is what prosopon means, it is a key theme of the Old Testament. If you are cast out of the presence of the Lord, you're just done. Okay? To live and to dwell in the face of the Lord or before the face of the Lord is to dwell in covenant blessing, to be loved, to be blessed by him. And that ultimate state is what Isaiah was predicting, the restoration, the resurrection of Israel. And again, for brevity's sake here, what happens in Revelation 22, verse 4? In this New Jerusalem, after the old Jerusalem is destroyed, the old Jerusalem is Judah, going back to what Rick was saying a while ago. The focus is on Judah and Benjamin in the New Testament. 10 northern tribes are out of it, basically, except the promise of restoration. But here in Revelation, we have the divorcement and the death of Judah and Benjamin, but we have the remarriage of the 12 tribes. Revelation 7, Revelation chapter 14.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens in Revelation 22:4? Then they will see his face.
Amen.
That's I mean, this continuous, harmonious, and I'm currently working on a chart right now. It's in this chapter that I'm writing for Mike I'm going to copyright it. I'm going to charge. I'm
No,
going to charge. I'm going to charge him a royalty for every book
Uh-oh.
he sells. But the parallels that I'm presenting in this chart, I tell you guys, this is some of the most gratifying, satisfying, and harmonious stuff that I've done in a long time. It's just absolutely beautiful to see that harmonious thread. And let's not forget what Jesus said of Judah and Benjamin in his generation. You are a wicked and what? Adulterous generation. Well, what did it mean for Hosea to say the 10 northern tribes had committed adultery? Oh, okay. God was going to depart from her, going to divorce her, and put her to death. So that, in that regard, and I've got Kenneth Gentry's massive 2-volume set here, The Divorce of Israel, and Kenneth Gentry sees so much of this.
Yeah.
And yet he tries to extrapolate. He actually says, well, actually in one of those little smaller books entitled Navigating the Book of Revelation, and he said, contrary to the popular view, he should have said contrary to the creedal view, but nonetheless, contrary to the popular view, Revelation 21 is not about the end of human history.
I know.
It is about the divorce of the old covenant wife and the wedding of the new covenant bride, who fully supplants the old covenant bride and enters into this new creation.
And that destroy. I mean, that admission alone. That is why Doug Wilson is saying, "Well, wait a second. It's a long way down to the aisle. We're not quite married yet. Still coming down," because he sees that the resurrection takes place when the wedding does. He sees that Gentry gave the farm away, but Gentry can't get out of it because that's been his bread and butter. There's this whole divorce thing. So he's done. I mean, the goose is cooked.
Yeah, this is a powerful concept. And, at St. Louis next year, I'll be presenting 2 lessons on the message of the prophets. And I'll be focusing on this entire narrative of Israel, of divorce, departure, death, restoration, remarriage, and resurrection. Because Paul saw the resurrection or the restoration of Israel under the Messiah transformed into the image of Christ, not the image of Moses, but after the image of Christ, the new covenant. And so Paul says, if the casting away of Israel be the salvation of the Gentiles, what shall that's Israel's acceptance be, but
life
from the dead? There's Paul's doctrine of the resurrection encapsulated. Because guess what? The 2 key passages that Paul cites for his proof of the resurrection of the dead in 1 Corinthians 15, 54 and 55 and 56, Isaiah 25, Hosea 13. Isaiah 25 is the time of the wedding banquet feast, the restoration of Israel, depicted under the imagery of the resurrection. Hosea chapter 13 is the deliverance from the death spoken of in Hosea, which is he's taken her away into bondage, into captivity because of her sin. He would restore her. And as Isaiah chapter 6 goes ahead to point out, on the 3rd day, he will raise us up. And he uses anastasis, the form for resurrection, the word for resurrection in the Septuagint. And we will live in his prosopon.
Presence face.
If you think you're going to get all that in 2 messages, you need to be drug tested.
That's good.
Thank you for your vote of confidence, Zach, but you know me too well.
I wondered why you were smiling down there, Zach.
So is this a good...
I got to say this, at Jonesboro last year, right? here I am about halfway through my lesson. I'm going, well, okay, I got to stop. Zach, go ahead. All right.
Hmm.
I thought you was going to go another 10 minutes, not another 50.
Oh,
Whoa, whoa.
All right. Is that a good place to end it on Zach's
I think
joke?
that's a pretty good place.
Zach's joking.
That's
So-
that's my insult for the day, I guess. So
Is there anything else that we need to cover to wrap up chapter 20? Because I mean, we have obviously the great white throne, and then it's going to be talking about the dead were judged, the sea that give up the dead. Do we need to dig into that at all? Obviously, what the sea represents, and then death and Hades and what they give up. Do we want to talk about that next week, or do we want to go ahead and wrap that up?
let's do that next week, and then we'll talk about the judgment of the dead too.
Okay, perfect.
Again, get into recapitulation, and what does the rest of the New Testament teach about that?
And did we ever at this, forgive me, maybe I missed this, but did we ever talk about the Bema seat of Christ versus what the great white throne is? Have we discussed the difference?
I don't think so.
If you did, it wasn't one that I was on.
Is that something we could talk about next week as well?
Sure,
Do you know what I'm talking about?
not completely, but
It's something it was something that was brought up that I saw like in a clip between DeMar and Wilson. They were talking, and you guys were there, and I was just very curious what was said. They haven't released that yet, right? So I have no idea what I was talking about. I just thought it would be a good time to bring it up because of the.
I'll have to research that. I've never heard that there's a distinction.
well, they were trying to figure out what the judgment was of 2 Corinthians 3,
Mm-hmm.
of what that day was, and I'm
Mhm.
sitting there going, this has got nothing to do with after death. The day goes back to was it 2 Corinthians? No, it was 1 Corinthians. I said the day goes back to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, when the gifts were being confirmed in the church until that day would come, when the Lord's day would come. So that was
Well, maybe I misunderstood what I was watching, but it certainly seemed like he was making a distinction between the judgments. The
He was
Bema
trying.
seat of Christ, well, he was. That's why I thought maybe it was something that we could just chat about since we're at the
I would
judgment
like to
seat.
know more of what they're trying to say.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
All right. Well, guys, I appreciate it, and we will talk to you next week.
All right, guys.
All right. Bye,
Good night,
everybody.
guys.
See you guys.
See ya.